And we're back.
Yay!
And we're talking about last week was good and got kind of deep because it was work, and we were talking about when life's not fair.
Right.
And then we literally followed up this week with Bumpy and the Wise Old Wolfhound, which is same song, kind of second verse, only deeper.
Right, because in the first, in work, it was why do bad things happen to good people? And now we're wrestling with why do people get sick, and why...
That everybody gets sick.
Yeah.
Everybody goes through stuff. And bless you.
Thank you.
And coming to grips with that for kids.
Yeah.
And one, I love how they talk to kids about, stuff happens, and it happens to everybody, and you work through it, and lots of days and nights pass, and then they get better, and then you move forward. But then, it also opens the door for, what happens if they don't. And there's lots of really good stuff here, but I really like how they walk through it in a way for kids to understand. And it's funny. It's purple panda pants, and they're why is this happening? And we have no idea why Bingo was in the hospital. Literally, they go into zero explanation as far as why she is there, and super it's difficult because when Sophie was born, they released us from the hospital. We went home and got a call. We had just walked in the door when we got home, got a call, and they said, oh, by the way, her blood work came back, her bilirubin is extraordinarily high. You need to get to the PICU, because she was preemie. You need to get back to the PICU immediately. And it's wait, what?
We were discharged. We were home.
We were discharged. We were home.
I was picking up food.
Yeah.
From a spot around the corner from our house, and it was we're going back to the hospital.
And we have no idea in this situation. Were they blindsided by something like that? Or was it she had RSV, or she had something where it was
she had a heartworm.
Or she had oh, that would be sad. But she had something where it was okay, we need to monitor and kind of keep an eye on it, or whatever it was. We have no idea. And I feel like that's part of the not knowing is part of the story in this. And what did Bumpy have that they needed to cure? And they showed the spots and everything, but they didn't say specifically what it was. But I feel like that was part of it, was it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They were going through, just like we all go at some point are going to go through a situation that isn't fair. And it's not fair. But walking through it and knowing, as Christians, believing that God is walking with us through these situations.
Yeah. And they do a really good job, like you said, about keeping it, they keep it funny and entertaining, and purple underpants and bum worms and muffin and socks. It's funny, it's entertaining, and it's, hey, it's okay if you get sick, because everybody gets sick. Yeah. And the verse I thought of was from 1 Corinthians 10:13. No testing has overtaken you that is not common to everyone. God is faithful. He will not let you be tested beyond your strength, but with the testing, He'll also provide the way out, so you may be able to overcome it. And it's that everyone's going to have trials and tribulations, and this stuff come up, and that's going to look different for everyone, but everyone's going through it. Everyone gets sick eventually. Everyone has something they have to struggle through. God is faithful.
And I feel like it brings up kind of the bigger questions, though, especially as Christians, and things that we have to reconcile for ourselves and reconcile with our kids. And you were talking about a podcast. Tim Elmore was talking about how parents set boundaries for their kids, and then as the kids get older, they have to decide whether they're going to keep those boundaries for themselves or if they're going to set new boundaries.
Well, and he even said to his kids, "You're going to tear down my boundaries." Like you are going to tear down my boundaries and establish your own boundaries now that you're 18 and you can do what you want. And he's like, I hope that the boundaries you set for yourselves are similar to the boundaries I would have set for you, but you have to do this on your own now.
But it made me think of, like, in this situation, you know, we believe that God is faithful, that God sees us through, and that even though we go through situations that don't make sense, that we don't understand, we see family members who passed away from cancer or passed away from my grandmother had meningitis and then had a brainstem stroke from that and ended up passing away, and it was a significant time in the hospital and back and forth, and we watched her suffer through that, but believing that God was faithful, and he's faithful to us, and he was faithful to, like, my grandmother in that situation, and teaching our kids that, you know, we are not alone. We're gonna go through stuff. And I feel like it's a little bit of an Americanized, you know, view of Christianity, that we won't suffer, you know, God's the God of healing, and so we will never get sick, and if we get sick, it means that we didn't have enough faith. You know, there's a little bit of an Americanized view of that. But that's we believe that stuff's gonna happen, because stuff has happened.
Yeah.
And we've talked before about we were told we couldn't have kids, and ended up going through IVF and going through all of that process in order to be able to have kids, and don't believe, you know, that that was a punishment of some kind, or that was, you know, that we do believe that God was faithful. And teach our kids that we believe that God is faithful, even if we get sick, even if someone that we love gets cancer, even if someone that we love passes away. God is still faithful and sees us through and sees them through those situations. But at some point, they're going to have to decide for themselves. Mm-hmm. And we can enforce that. We can say, this is what we believe. But at some point, they're going to have that boundary, or that thought that we've given them. They're going to have to decide for themselves, you know, and come to the realization, you know, is that what they believe? Because they're going to be faced with it just like we have been.
Yeah, and I feel like this episode is all about changing perspective. Yeah. And for example, with Bingo, when you first see her, she's wanting to go home and leave the hospital, and Chili also probably wants to do the same thing. And it's very much like, can this be over? Can we be done? And they're not. They're still stuck there. And it's kind of that, I don't want to be here anymore. And then Bluey, when she starts off with Socks getting sick, Bumpy getting sick, is trying to find a way to fix the problem, to make it better, even though it's not something that they can just fix or flip a switch, right? And it's that walking through a difficult situation where it's discouraging, and you feel like there's nothing else you can do, and then realizing that this isn't you this isn't you only going through this. Everyone else has been through something. Everyone else has been sick, we'll just say sick or tested, trialed in this. And once she realizes that nobody else can fix it, because everyone else, in fact, is going to go through something like that, it's not about, oh, why is this happening to Bumpy? This is terrible. It's, okay, I'm going to spend time with Bumpy. I'm going to read with her. I'm going to be with her through this until she gets better. Yeah. And it's the perspective switch from, why is this bad thing happening? Well, complaining kind of, to, well, not I'm going to make the most of it, but I'm going to be here and be present, yeah, and be with you, and which is what we feel like God is with us. And if you remember that, I mean, there's 100 verses probably that talk about how the outcome of tests and trials and tribulations hopefully is renewed strength and trust and faith.
Yeah.
Because we see how God was able to help walk us through that. And that's the whole the footprints in the sand, the parts where there's only one set of footprints with the hardest parts. And he says, that's where I carried you.
Yeah.
And it's that. And we don't necessarily see it till we're on the other side of it. But it's that perspective.
Well, and it's, I mean, throughout the Old Testament, they're talking about build an altar in this place where God was faithful.
Mm-hmm.
Build an altar where in the places where God brought you across the Jordan River. Build an altar there so that your children's children can see this is where God was faithful to us. And again, that's kind of lost, in our American society, because we don't go build an altar of rocks, where God's been faithful to us. Mm-hmm. But for them, that was like they would go back and see, and this is what God did. This is where God performed that miracle. And I feel like that's
yeah. And essentially, it's the tests and trials are going to come.
Mm-hmm.
How will you respond to them? And what's your foundation on? And we're trying to teach our kids that now. And obviously they've already been sick. And they're gonna get sick through other stuff.
And it's really hard not to feel like, you're failing just a little bit when it's like, and I have strep again. And there's like, again. And it's like, you try and you try and you try and you try. And it's not encouraging, because that other people are going through the same thing. But then you hear about someone else and it's like, we haven't left the house in 3 months because our kids have been sick. And I'm like, see, I'm not the only one. We're not the only ones. It feels like we finally get better and then we go somewhere. First time we go somewhere, and then there's again. So there is a little bit of camaraderie in knowing I'm not alone in this situation.
Yeah. And just for the verses for the God being present. So Deuteronomy 31:6, he'll not fail you or forsake you. Mm-hmm. But then also Hebrews 13:5. Now this one was fun because it's talking about don't love money. Be content with what you have, for God will never leave us or forsake us. And to me, it's more of that. We talked about it a little bit, I think, in work or previous episode, where it was God will provide and be there. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was maybe a couple weeks ago. But it was that God will never leave us or forsake us.
Yeah.
And that's He provides.
Yeah. And
He provides healing, provides wholeness, so many things. Now, what's hard sometimes, especially when we have this idea that, well, if you're sick, it's because you did something wrong. The problem with that then is, then what happens when everybody gets sick? Well, everyone's done something wrong. But one thing I liked about this episode, and they did it on purpose, I'm sure, but they probably didn't know that I was going to go theological with it. They didn't know. So the purple underpants, and everyone has a pair of purple underpants, but everyone else has been sick. But as Christians, we have someone with purple underpants who's never been sick.
Yeah.
And that was Christ. And this is I think a brilliant way to talk to your kids about how Jesus was like us, wore purple underpants too, but was without sin, didn't get sick, like however you want to phrase that. It's 2 Corinthians 5:21. For our sake he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. And it's that we do have someone who overcame everything, and through him we can overcome. And then it's working through, okay, well then, and you can be like, well, we can pray for people and we can do things. And sometimes you will see people get healed miraculously through God doing a miracle. And sometimes you see people get healed gradually of the thing, and it might be doctors and medicine and God and that. And then sometimes you're praying for someone and then they die. And so that is a conversation you're going to have to be ready for. And there's not an easy cliche answer to this, but I do have a phrase that I've used in this, and it's from a professor from college who'd been a missionary and a lot of other things, pastor and different things. And so one thing he used to say and not to stereotype or broad picture paint this, but he used to say that God heals everyone. Some he heals instantly, some he heals gradually, all he heals eternally. And it's a shift in perspective again. And it's not to say that what happens here doesn't matter, but it is to say that what happens on earth in our physical lifetime is not the end. And we do have the hope beyond this life. And that's we can mourn with hope, not like others do. And it's not fun when you have a family member pass away, but we remember that we have this time when we're physically present here on earth, and then we have where we will truly be made whole, which is in his presence. And I'm really glad that Bingo didn't die, or that Bumpy didn't die, and they didn't go that way with it. They do talk about that in the one with the budgie.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not there yet. So it is a perspective shift, though, and it's a reminder that this world is not our home, and we're here as ambassadors. In fact, the 2 Corinthians, I think, right before the verse I quoted, talks about how we're ambassadors for God, and it's that.
And teaching kids Emmanuel, God with us. And there's a VeggieTales episode. I'm trying to remember which episode it is right now, but there's a new VeggieTales episode that's the Christmas episode. And they're talking about the hope of Christmas and what Christmas is all about. And they're like, oh, it's the tree and it's the lights. And if we don't have this, then it's not Christmas. And, Pa Grape tells the story of Jesus' birth. And it's Jesus came, God with us, and he's with us in the hard times, and he's came to end the hard times. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to have hard times, but it means that he will be with us through that. And it's unfortunately, we can't shelter our kids away from hard times, and losing a job and going through people being sick and then being sick and these different things that are going to be happening. But it's that teaching them the hope of Jesus, the hope of Christmas, but the hope of Jesus, like what you were saying, and then the hope of eternal life as well, that we aren't alone. We don't go through this life alone, and that's part of our belief, our faith is Jesus came so that we would never be alone in this world of sin and darkness, that we have a light to help lead us and guide us. And that's that encouragement, and that I it's one of the biggest, going through postpartum depression a little bit, that I faced was I felt so alone. And going through therapy, and that one of the things that I had to retrain my brain was, I am not alone. I am not alone. I am not alone. Like, I'm literally, that was on repeat in my head for a long time, and it's just like, I am not alone. And going through that over and over and over and over again until it stuck, until it was in my brain. And that's sometimes what we have to do when we go through it. And again, it's our kids are going to have to make that decision for themselves, because it's one thing to go through it as a kid. It's one thing to go through it as, and you see something happen, but you don't, and we didn't have, or I didn't have anything growing up where I was hospitalized. I was sick a lot as a kid, but not as like, I didn't end up, well, actually I did end up in the hospital, but it was not where life-threatening for me. And so, I'm sure that different situations have, but like our kids right now, and teaching our 6-year-old and 5-year-old, what does God with us mean? And for them right now, it's okay, if we shut off the light in the room and we give you this lantern, you know, does it, this is like what Jesus is. He is this light. He's the light. And let them see, okay, you know, the darkness is around us and it's here, but he's here and he's faithful. And unlike the flashlight, the battery's not going to go out. And if we keep our eye on him, then we will have that presence with us.
Mm-hmm.
So
I thought of something while you were talking, and then I forgot what it was. And part of it is how do you internalize it? Of course, we model it, and part of what we can do as parents is modeling it by being present with our kids, and walking them through those struggles, and also showing them how we rely on God through ours.
Yeah.
Because
and
they
that
do see
doesn't
that.
mean not. I'm sorry. Don't mean to be so bad. That doesn't mean not showing them the struggle. And there's some things, you know, it's age appropriate, not letting them, you know, in on some things that are happening, but like having our kids understand what struggles are, and showing them that we are, you know, I didn't show my kids that I was going through postpartum depression because that's not something they need right now. At some point, you know, I will have that conversation with them. But then again, we were going through it's storm season here this last year, and our power went out and we ended up losing a freezer full of stuff, and I cried. Unfortunately, it was a really stressful situation because I had a freezer full of food that was lost, and you know, let them see this is a hard situation for me. This is something that we're going to have to deal with and that we're going to have to go through. And so there's certain things that we've started letting them see, that this is how we go through stuff. This is how we process things. And this is how we process, you know, letting them see some of us going through some harder things, and seeing that how we work through that.
Mm-hmm. And I have another thought.
Sorry. Throwing off your groove.
No, it's okay. George Mueller.
Yeah.
So, George Mueller, wonderful person. Like, recommend highly reading his life story, biographies, whatever. One of the things he would do, so he had orphanages in England, and he was very much a man of faith. And one thing that I really, really respect about him was he was the sort of person who said, I will never ask anyone for any money. He said, God, if you want someone to give me money, you tell them to give me money. Like, I'm not going to ask anyone to give me money. And so they would say they lived by faith. And one of the stories is where they come down for breakfast and there's no food to eat. And so they sit down to pray, and they pray for food. God, provide food. And knock on the door, and it's the baker, and he said, I've been up since however early this morning because I felt like I woke up in the middle of the night and I was told, make bread for you guys. And he's like, you're an answer to prayer, thank you, come on in. And then as they're eating the bread, knock on the door, and the milk truck broke down outside, and he's like, hey, all this milk's gonna go bad, do you guys want it? And it was literally those sorts of stories regularly.
Yeah.
And they need this much money, exact that amount of money came in unexpectedly from some random person. And it was that thing. And I feel like we don't have to just rely on our lives and our stories, but like telling them stories like that. And I really like stories like that because they're documented. This has happened, and it's not as ambiguous as sometimes we think of stories like with the Jesus feeding the thousands with the fish, and it's like, okay, that was a miracle. He did that because he was Jesus. It's kind of the way people might take with it. But it's this one, it's he used other people. God used other people to meet this need.
Yeah.
And it's that God's present, God's with us. He won't have us go through any tests that he's not asked anyone else to go through. And if our perspective's right, it will bring us closer to him. And because you can look at it one of two ways. You can look at it as, well, I'm going to change my perspective and try to find a way to get closer to God. Because tests like this are going to happen to anyone, whether or not I believe in God. Or you can look at it as, well, if God really loved me, like, he wouldn't send tests. It's like, well, no, because if you believe that, then your entire theology is going to crumble, because everyone's going to get tested and have struggles and have to overcome and have to rely on God's presence. Oh, there was a thing I read about open doors, and it's how do you know if God's opened the door? Yeah. And it won't contradict what God's written in his word. So God's not going to ask you to, like, go commit a crime as part of a door that he's opened. There'll be confirmation from scripture or from, a pastor or someone else. And then the last one is, it will force you to rely on God. And that one got me, because we've been praying for the last year for God to open the right door, and then he did. And I would say it's forced us to rely on God more than ever. Yeah. And that's, to me, is even more confirmation that it is actually from God, because God's not going to open a door for you, that allows you to walk away from him. Like, why would he do that? So instead it's going to be, oh yeah, there's this great opportunity. You have to trust God and take a leap of faith and pray.
And those leaps of faith when it's easy, those leaps of faith when it's walking through a door and taking that step, to me, those are the steps of faith that help build that spiritual muscle, so that when we do go through a family member who has cancer and watching them and end up them passing away, being able to still believe that God is faithful. And he's walked us through these situations. He's walked them through, the gates of heaven. And we believe through all of these circumstances that each one is God's faithfulness, even when it's hard, even when we don't understand, why. We still believe he's faithful, and that is preparing, we're seeing God faithful when it's hard, but it's a step of faith. And then we're seeing God being faithful when it's hard in a situation that we don't understand, and where we're going to have to wait until heaven to be able to see this person again. And that's, like with our kids, that's what we're trying to help them see, is God's faithful, to bring breakfast. And then he's also faithful when we don't understand what's happening and why we ended up having to go back to the hospital and stay in the hospital, and had a little glow baby until her bilirubin was back in normal levels, and ended up going through that whole mess. We don't understand, but we know that God is with us, and Emmanuel, God is with us, and that's what we rely on, and that's what we want our kids to see, that we rely on him and can rely on him, and build those altars, not actual altars, but the stories. And we've tried to start memory books of where we're writing it down, and this is something that happened, and then writing it down, and this is where God was faithful and saw us through the situation, and hopefully being able to look back with them at some point and be able to show them that memorial and build their faith just the same way that it's built ours. So it's hard. This one was a rough one. This one I feel like is a little bit of a rough one. sickness is hard. And like I said, we don't know what was going on with Bingo, but as a mom, it wouldn't matter. Hospital stay it wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
It would be a rough day. And this was a deep one.
Yeah.
So,
one last thing is, I was really glad that they had everyone with Bluey, and you saw the community. It was Mackenzie was there, and Lucky was there, and Muffin was there, and Socks was there, and Stripe and Aunt Trixie and Bandit. And it wasn't Bluey having to be at home with Bandit by themselves.
yeah.
And they were also able to use the community to make the video to help inspire Bingo. And that rely on your community, your church, your group, your friends and family and neighbors. They can help you go through those times as well. So
Yeah.
that's this week.
That is.
Yeah. So we're past time again. I'm sorry, guys. We'll pray and then we'll close it out here. Father, thank you for being with us always, but especially in the hard times. Help us to rely on you. Help us to model that with our kids and show them that we do trust in you, can trust in you, for you are faithful no matter what. In Jesus' name, amen.
You guys have a good week.
Yeah. Bye.
See you next time.